There was a time when arms were not built by machines that isolate every fiber, but by repetition, patience, and an intuitive respect for how the human body adapts to stress. And even today, when science has advanced and gyms have become more complex, the physiology of muscle growth has not changed its mind about what truly works. Because muscles still respond to tension, blood flow, time under load, and consistency, not trends or shortcuts. Before muscle ever grows in size, before a vein becomes visible or a sleeve feels tighter around the arm, something far more subtle happens deep within the body. Something that cannot be seen in the mirror and rarely discussed in loud gym conversations. Because the nervous system must first decide that growth is safe, necessary, and sustainable, and without that internal agreement, no amount of weight or volume will create lasting change. The human body is not a machine that simply adds material when stressed. It is a biological intelligence that constantly evaluates risk, energy availability, and survival priorities. And when you ask it to grow muscle, you're asking it to spend valuable resources, calories, minerals, and recovery capacity on tissue that it does not strictly need for survival. So the first question the body asks is not how heavy the weight is, but whether this new demand can be trusted. In my coaching days, I saw many lifters who trained hard but grew slowly, and many who trained simply yet grew steadily. And the difference was almost never genetics alone, but how their nervous systems responded to training, because aggressive, chaotic, or ego-driven lifting often triggers protective tension, limiting muscle recruitment and increasing fatigue without productive stimulus. When the nervous system senses danger, whether from poor form, jerky movements, or excessive strain, it tightens muscles reflexively, reducing range of motion and limiting force output as a safety mechanism. And in that state, the muscles are not free to lengthen, contract fully, or experience the metabolic environment that encourages growth. Old school arm training emphasized control for a reason. Slow curls, steady extensions, full ranges that allowed the brain to map the movement clearly. Because repetition under predictable conditions teaches the nervous system that this pattern is safe, repeatable, and worth adapting to. And once that trust is established, muscle fibers are allowed to express more force, recruit more motor units, and eventually grow. The biceps and triceps are particularly sensitive to nervous system regulation because they are involved in fine motor tasks, pulling, pushing, stabilizing the shoulder and elbow. And when they are trained recklessly, the body prioritizes joint protection over muscle development, subtly shifting effort away from the target tissue. When exercises are performed with intention rather than urgency, the nervous system relaxes its protective brakes, allowing deeper fiber recruitment, especially in slow-twitch and intermediate fibers that respond well to sustained tension, which explains why lifters using moderate weights with excellent control often develop fuller arms than those chasing maximum loads. Another critical aspect is breathing. Because breath directly influences nervous system tone, slow, steady breathing during arm exercises shifts the body to a parasympathetic state, reducing unnecessary tension and improving blood flow, while holding breath or breathing erratically signals stress, again limiting muscle cooperation. In simpler training eras, people did not talk about vagal tone or motor control, but they instinctively trained in ways that respected them, resting adequately between sets, focusing on feel rather than numbers, and allowing the arms to pump naturally rather than forcing fatigue prematurely. Muscle fibers grow when they experience a combination of mechanical tension and metabolic stress in an environment that feels safe enough to adapt, and safety is not an emotional concept here, but a physiological one governed by neural input, hormonal balance, and energy availability. This is why consistency often outperforms intensity, because repeated exposure to manageable stress teaches a nervous system that this demand is part of daily life, and the body responds by reinforcing tissue rather than resisting change. Over time, as trust builds, coordination improves, allowing more fibers to fire together, increasing strength without visible size at first, and only after this neurological foundation is laid does hypertrophy become efficient, as the body now sees value in investing in muscle mass. I often told trainees that if your arms feel shaky, strained, or disconnected during training, growth will be slow. But if they feel warm, full, and responsive, growth is already happening even if the mirror is not caught up yet. The beauty of old arm routines was that they created this state naturally, using repeated movements that the nervous system quickly learned, allowing focus to shift from survival to adaptation, from protection to construction, from tension to cooperation. In a world that now celebrates novelty, the body still prefers familiarity. because familiarity reduces neural noise, improves efficiency, and frees resources for growth rather than constant recalibration. When arms grow under these conditions, they grow not as inflated tissue but as functional, resilient muscle, supported by strong tendons, healthy joints, and a nervous system that trusts the movement pattern completely. And this is why old is gold. Not because the exercises were magical, but because they unknowingly honored the deepest rule of human physiology, that growth follows trust, and trust is built through calm, consistent, intelligent repetition. Time under tension is one of those concepts that sounds technical, yet it describes something deeply intuitive. Because muscles do not count how much weight you lift. They respond to how long they're asked to work under meaningful load. And this truth was practiced long before it was measured. When an arm muscle contracts and relaxes slowly, it experiences sustained mechanical stress. And this stress is what signals the body that reinforcement is needed, not the sudden shock of a heavy lift that passes too quickly for the tissue to fully respond. In my coaching days, lifters who slowed down their repetitions often felt weaker at first, because momentum had been doing much of the work, but over time their arms became fuller, denser, and more responsive, revealing that control exposes weakness only so it can be strengthened. Muscle fibers are living structures that respond to deformation, stretching, and contraction over time, and when a movement is rushed, fibers experience only partial engagement, whereas controlled repetition ensures that both the shortening and lengthening phases contribute to growth. The lowering phase of a curl, often ignored or rushed, creates deep internal tension as the muscle resists gravity, and this resistance is metabolically demanding, producing an internal environment that encourages protein synthesis. Old school training emphasized feeling the weight on the way down, not as punishment, but as education, teaching the muscle how to manage load through its full range, which strengthens connective tissue and improves coordination. Heavy weights can create tension, but if they limit range or force compensatory movement, the signal becomes scattered, shared with joints, ligaments, and assisting muscles rather than concentrated where growth is desired. Moderate weight, held under control, creates a cleaner signal, one that the body can interpret clearly, allowing it to respond efficiently without triggering protective mechanisms. Another advantage of time under tension is improved blood flow, as sustained contractions increase local circulation, delivering oxygen and nutrients while removing metabolic byproducts, a process that supports recovery and adaptation. This increased blood flow also creates a familiar pump, which is not just cosmetic, but a sign of cellular swelling, a temporary expansion that may play a role in triggering growth pathways. Controlled repetition also enhances motor learning, as the nervous system refines timing and coordination with each slow movement, improving recruitment of muscle fibers that might remain dormant during explosive lifts. When movements are rushed, the brain prioritizes efficiency, recruiting the strongest fibers to complete the task quickly, but slower movements encourage broader participation, engaging fibers that respond best to hypertrophy-focused training. This is why arm size often improves when lifters reduce weight and increase control, not because the muscle prefers light load, but because it finally experiences the kind of stress it can adapt to productively. Old routines rarely chase failure aggressively, stopping sets when form deteriorated, preserving quality of tension rather than exhausting the nervous system, and this restraint allowed for higher weekly volume without burnout. Volume accumulates through consistent exposure, and controlled reps make it possible to train frequently without overwhelming joints or recovery capacity. Another subtle benefit of controlled repetition is joint health, because smooth movement distributes force evenly, reducing wear on cartilage and connective tissue, which allows long-term training consistency. Muscles grow slowly, but joints remember abuse quickly, and old-school methods instinctively protected joints to ensure longevity. When trainees learn control weight, they also learn patience, and patience aligns perfectly with the biological timeline of hypertrophy, which unfolds over weeks and months rather than sessions. The arms, often trained for appearance, respond especially well to this approach because they are involved in daily tasks and adapt readily when stress is introduced gradually and respectfully. Over time, controlled repetition builds not only muscle size but muscle quality, creating tissue that is resilient, responsive, and capable of sustained effort. This quality is felt as stability during lifts, confidence in movement, and reduced soreness, all signs that adaptation is occurring harmoniously. In contrast, Chasing heavy numbers often satisfies the ego, while leaving muscle growth inconsistent, because the nervous system limits output to protect joints, reducing effective tension. Science now explains this through motor unit recruitment and fatigue management, but experienced coaches understood it through observation, watching who grew steadily and who stalled repeatedly. The body responds best when challenged but not threatened, and control repetition communicates challenge without chaos. This is why time under tension remains a cornerstone of effective arm training. Not as a rigid formula, but as a guiding principle that honors how muscle tissue actually adapts. As long as muscle fibers respond to sustained mechanical stress, slow and controlled movement will remain one of the most reliable tools for growth, regardless of how fitness culture evolves. Recovery is often spoken about as something passive, a pause between workouts, but in truth it is an active biological process where the real work of growth takes place, and without respecting it, even the most perfectly designed training stimulus fades into wasted effort. When muscles are trained, especially the arms which contain a dense network of blood vessels and nerves, microscopic disruption occurs within the fibers, not as damage in a harmful sense, but as a signal that adaptation is required. And this signal only translates into growth if the body has time, resources, and internal calm to respond. Old-school training culture did not rush recovery because lifters were closely attuned to how their bodies felt, understanding instinctively that soreness, stiffness, and fatigue were messages rather than badges of honor. Blood flow plays a central role in this recovery process, delivering amino acids, oxygen, and hormones to working muscles, while removing waste products that accumulate during contraction, and simple arm exercises performed with control encourage circulation without excessive inflammation. This is one reason pump-focused training was valued, not because it looked impressive, but because it left muscles warm, nourished, and receptive rather than tight and irritated. When blood flow is adequate, connective tissue such as tendons and fascia receive nourishment as well, improving elasticity and resilience, which supports long-term training consistency. Breathing is deeply intertwined with this process because it regulates nervous system tone, influencing whether the body remains a stressed, defensive state or shifts toward recovery and repair. Shallow or held breath during training signals threat, increasing muscle tension and limiting circulation, while slow, rhythmic breathing communicates safety, allowing vessels to dilate and tissues to relax. In my coaching days, lifters who learned to breathe smoothly during arm work often reported better pumps, less joint discomfort, and faster recovery between sessions, even without changing their program. The parasympathetic nervous system, activated through calm breathing, supports digestion, hormone balance, and tissue repair, all of which are essential for hypertrophy. Without this shift, the body remains in a state of alert, prioritizing survival over growth, regardless of how well exercises are performed. Sleep also emerges as a silent architect of arm size, because during deep rest, growth hormone release, protein synthesis, and neural consolidation occur, reinforcing the adaptations initiated during training. Old-school routines often respected sleep naturally, training at consistent times, avoiding excessive late-night stimulation, and understanding that progress slowed noticeably when rest was compromised. Muscles do not grow in the gym. They grow when the body is allowed to interpret training as a constructive stimulus rather than an ongoing emergency. Another overlooked aspect of recovery is emotional state, because chronic stress elevates cortisol, a hormone that interferes with muscle repair and nutrient utilization, subtly sabotaging growth even when training and diet appear adequate. Calm, familiar routines reduce mental stress, creating a psychological environment that supports physical adaptation, which explains why lifters often grow better when training feels grounded rather than frantic. Old arm routines, repeated week after week, provided this mental stability, reducing decision fatigue and allowing focus to shift inward toward sensation and control. Hydration also influences recovery more than most realize, because blood volume affects circulation efficiency, and even mild dehydration can impair nutrient delivery to muscles. Simple movements performed consistently encourage natural thirst cues and recovery rhythms, aligning training with the body's internal regulation systems. Another key factor is spacing of sessions, because arms, those smaller muscles, are used frequently in daily life, and overtraining them disrupts recovery signals, leading to stagnation rather than growth. Old school approaches often train arms indirectly through compound movements and then directly with moderate volume, allowing frequent stimulation without overwhelming recovery capacity. This balance preserved joint health and nervous system readiness, ensuring that each session built upon the last rather than compensating for fatigue. When recovery is respected, muscle soreness decreases over time, strength becomes more consistent, and arm measurements increase gradually, all signs that adaptation is occurring efficiently. This efficiency is not flashy, but it is sustainable, allowing progress to continue year after year rather than peaking briefly and collapsing. Modern science now confirms what experience once revealed, that recovery quality directly influences hypertrophy outcomes, affecting everything from protein synthesis rates to motor unit behavior. Old school training succeeded because it created space for recovery, not by accident, but by respecting the body's rhythms even without formal terminology. When recovery, blood flow, and breathing align, muscle tissue is not merely repaired but improved, emerging stronger, fuller, and more capable of handling future stress. And when arms grow under these conditions, they feel alive rather than strained, responsive rather than fatigued, reflecting a system that has learned not just to work hard, but to recover wisely. Arm size was never truly built in isolation, even though mirrors and measurement tapes often make it feel that way. In reality, the arms respond how the entire body moves, stabilizes, rests, and organizes effort, because muscles do not exist as independent parts, but as participants in a coordinated system. During my coaching days, the lifters who developed the most impressive arms were rarely those who obsessed over curls alone, but those whose whole bodies learned how to support force, transfer load, and remain stable under effort, allowing the arms to express strength rather than compensate for weakness elsewhere. The shoulders, spine, and core play a quiet yet decisive role in arm development. When posture collapses or the torso lacks stability, the nervous system shifts attention toward balance and safety, reducing the intensity of arm muscle recruitment to prevent injury. In contrast, a stable base allows the arm to work freely, applying tension precisely where it is intended. Old school training emphasized standing movements, control posture, and full body awareness not as stylistic choices, but because they naturally integrated the arms into the kinetic chain. A curl performed with an upright spine, an engaged core, creates a different internal environment than the same movement done while slouched or unstable. This integration enhances force transfer, allowing the arms to experience meaningful tension without excessive load. The body prefers this efficiency because it conserves energy and reduces joint stress, and when the body approves of a movement pattern, it reinforces it through adaptation. Compound movements played a supporting role in arm growth for this reason. Pulling and pushing exercises taught the arm to cooperate with larger muscle groups, improving neural coordination and baseline strength. When isolation exercises followed, the arms were already primed to respond. Old routines rarely separated aesthetics from function. Strength was not trained for appearance alone, but for usefulness, and the arms grew as a natural consequence of being asked to perform meaningful work repeatedly. Belief in the process also mattered more than many realized. Confidence reduces unnecessary tension. When lifters trusted their routines, they moved with calm focus rather than doubt, and this psychological state influenced muscle activation patterns in subtle but important ways. Doubt creates hesitation, and hesitation alters movement quality. The nervous system becomes cautious, limiting output. Old school training minimized doubt by keeping routines simple and familiar, allowing the body to settle into predictable rhythms. This predictability freed mental space, shifting attention away from constant evaluation toward execution. The arms benefited because effort became consistent rather than erratic. Rest periods were also part of this harmony. Adequate rest between sets allowed energy systems to recover sufficiently, preserving repetition quality. Rush sets, though intense, often reduced total effective volume by degrading form and focus. Nutrition supported the system quietly. Meals were not optimized to extremes, but consistent and sufficient, providing the raw materials needed for repair and growth. The body responds best to reliability, and regular nourishment reinforced the sense that growth was sustainable. When the whole body is aligned toward one purpose, adaptation accelerates. Muscles receive clear signals, joints feel supported, and the nervous system remains cooperative. Arm size increases not as an isolated achievement, but as a reflection of systemic balance. This holistic approach also protects longevity. Arms built within a harmonious system remain functional over time, resisting injury and maintaining strength even as training evolves. Modern science describes this as intermuscular coordination and systemic recovery, but experienced coaches recognize it through observation, noticing that fragmented training produced fragmented results. Old-school arm development succeeded because it respected the body as an integrated organism rather than a collection of parts, allowing growth to emerge organically rather than being forced. When arms grow under these conditions, they do not just appear larger, they move with confidence, endurance, and control, signaling a body that has learned how to work together. And this is why exercises from earlier coaching days still work today, not because time stood still, but because human physiology did not change, and it continues to reward harmony, patience, and unified effort.